Thank you, musicians. Would you please take your Bibles with me and turn in them to the book of Leviticus, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and if you would, please stand as you read. For this morning's reading, we'll be reading the entirety of chapter 20. Leviticus chapter 20. Please follow along as I read. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Say to the people of Israel, any one of the people of Israel or of the strangers who sojourn in Israel, who gives any of his children to Molech, shall surely be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him with stones. I myself will set my face against that man and will cut him off from among his people, because he has given one of his children to Molech, to make my sanctuary unclean and to profane my holy name. And if the people of the land do at all close their eyes to that man when he gives one of his children to Molech and do not put him to death, then I will set my face against that man and against his clan and will cut them off from among their people, him and all who follow him in whoring after Molech. If a person turns to mediums or necromancers, whoring after them, I will set my face against that person and will cut him off from among his people. Consecrate yourselves, therefore, and be holy, for I am the Lord your God. Keep my statutes and do them. I am the Lord who sanctifies you. For anyone who curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. He has cursed his father or his mother, his blood is upon him. If a man commits adultery with the wife of his neighbor, both the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. If a man lies with his father's wife, he has uncovered his father's nakedness. Both of them shall surely be put to death. Their blood is upon them. If a man lies with his daughter-in-law, both of them shall surely be put to death. They have committed perversion. Their blood is upon them. If a man lies with a male as with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood is upon them. If a man takes a woman and her mother also, it is depravity. He and they shall be burned with fire, that there may be no depravity among you. If a man lies with an animal, he shall surely be put to death, and you shall kill the animal. If a woman approaches any animal and lies with it, you shall kill the woman and the animal. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood is upon them. If a man takes his sister, a daughter of his father or a daughter of his mother, and sees her nakedness, and she sees his nakedness, it is a disgrace, and they shall be cut off in the sight of the children of their people. He has uncovered his sister's nakedness, and has uncovered her nakedness. He has made naked her, he shall bear his iniquity. If a man lies with a woman during her menstrual period and uncovers her nakedness, he has made naked her fountain, and she has uncovered the fountain of her blood. Both of them shall be cut off from among their people. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister or of your father's sister, for that is to make naked one's relative. They shall bear their iniquity. If a man lies with his uncle's wife, he has uncovered his uncle's nakedness. They shall bear their sin. They shall die childless. If a man takes his brother's wife, it is impurity. He has uncovered his brother's nakedness. They shall be childless. You shall therefore keep all my statutes and all my rules and do them, that the land where I am bringing you to live may not vomit you out. You shall not walk in the customs of the nation that I am driving out before you, for they did all these things, and therefore I detested them. But I have said to you, you shall inherit their land, and I will give it to you to possess, a land flowing with milk and honey. I am the Lord your God, who has separated you from the peoples. You shall therefore separate the clean beast from the unclean, and the unclean bird from the clean. You shall not make yourselves detestable by any beast or bird or by anything with which the ground crawls, which I have set apart for you to hold unclean. You shall be holy to me, for I, the Lord, am holy, and have separated you from the peoples, that you should be mine. A man or woman who is a medium or a necromancer shall surely be put to death. They shall be stoned with stones. Their blood shall be upon them. May the Lord add his blessing this morning to the reading of his word. You can be seated. Pastor Alex came into my office this morning and saw the book that I've been reading. If you can't see it, the title of it is Public Stoning. And he's like, you should put this on your nightstand after one of the kids is about to get disciplined, like you should just kind of keep this before them. But I want to just approach this message this morning as though you never stepped foot in church, and you've never opened a Bible, and you find yourself in a hotel room away from your family, and you think to yourself, you know what? This nation's getting crazy. I should, open the drawer in the hotel room and look for that Gideon Bible and open up the Bible and see what God has to say, And you open to Leviticus 20 and you read that. What would be your response? It's hard to know, potentially. Maybe you are that person that fits those descriptions. But what would you think? Would you be shocked? Would you be baffled? Would you be tempted to close the book, thinking it's crazier than what's happening in our world? Especially in today's cultural milieu, you're tempted to think that this is barbaric. That's an interesting word, isn't it? Barbaric. Like, who gets to define what barbaric is? Barbarians? Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Give them their due, right? I mean, what would you think when you came across this passage? What do you think now? Is this a passage in the Bible that you're embarrassed about? Do you shy away from a passage such as this? Do you heartily embrace it? You see, even the things that we think most abominable are at least worthy of fully understanding, right? I mean, you should understand a situation as best as you can from all angles. The Epistle of James says that wisdom from above, one of its characteristics is that it's open to reason. It's open to reason. That you're willing to discuss something no matter how foreign it might seem to you. You're willing to hear it out and discuss it. So I want to take Leviticus 20 and I want to say, how would God want us to understand this, not just then, but today? How should we think about a passage such as Leviticus 20? I'm going to give you sort of the guide that we're going to follow as we work through. We'll have 4 essential points. The first one is to read this passage, you really have to have 2 connections that came before this passage to make sense of this passage, okay? So we'll talk about those 2 connections. And then I want to answer the question, why these sins? Why are these sins? Not all of these sins are worthy of capital punishment. You notice that some of them, they'll just die childless, which is a big deal, but it's not death, right? Or their sin will be upon them, or they'll be cut off, which sometimes can mean death and sometimes mean just like ousted from the community. And so you notice that if you read this passage several times, you'll see that it moves from the most grievous sins to the less grievous sins. So there's an order to this. The most severe penalties to the less severe penalties is generally how it goes. We'll talk about the one where the person is burned. That's in the center. But it tends to move in priority. So we'll answer why these sins. Why are these sins so damnable in God's sight? And then third, I want to consider the death penalty in our nation. And then finally, I want to consider Christ. First, I want to go to 2 connections, 2 brief connections that you need to understand. And I want to be frank from the outset. I personally am not apologetic for this passage being in the Bible. I think that the degree to which we take a passage such as this seriously, as a nation, our nation will get better, not worse. It will become less barbaric, not more barbaric. Significantly less barbaric. We live in a barbaric nation. That's the fact. I mean, 76 million babies' blood is on our land. That's probably far more than what was sacrificed in Canaan. See, in Canaan, they had a different philosophy. We sacrifice babies for sake of ease, primarily. It's in the 90 percentile that abortions are for convenience versus health issues. In this day, they sacrificed their children because it was the last thing they wanted to give up. So it was a costly sacrifice. That's the concept. So if anyone's going to start picking on which nations are barbaric, we need to look in the mirror before we talk about biblical proportions. We mutilate ourselves. You may not think about that, but our nation cuts off its genitals. That's barbaric, in my opinion. It should be in your opinion. It should be in our nation's opinion. We do things such as this, but it's all in the medical room, right? And so we feel sophisticated. We feel clean. We feel sanitary with our barbarisms. Do you catching that? Okay. But it's going to get more personal as we go, so don't get too mad just yet. But let's see here. These two connections. The first that I want to talk about is stoning and worship. Now, you might think to yourself, man, I look at our church, and like a lot of churches, we have stained glass windows. We have a beautiful edifice. It's like a worshipful layout. And you could think of, if I were to have you write down, what would be the least worshipful experience you could possibly imagine? And maybe top of the list, or at least in the top 5, would be gathering around a person and hurling stones at them until they perish. That would seem like the worst, most unworshipful experience that you could think of. I mean, who really wants to watch an execution? You watch an execution kind of like you watch roadkill when you drive by. You don't want to look at it, but you kind of have to see it. It's that kind of thing, right? But you would hesitate to call a public stoning worshipful. But that's exactly how the Bible means to portray it, okay? Let me just ask a simple question. Hundreds, if not thousands of people gather around a single, let's not even call it a person. Let's just call it an object, okay? Maybe it's a piece of wood. Let's just domesticate it a little bit, okay? You gather around this object, and everybody grabs a stone, and they hurl it at this object. What will you do when that's over? This isn't a trick question. If everybody's semi-accurate, you will have a pile of stones. Now let me ask you another question. Are those stones chiseled and shaped in the form of like baseballs or softballs or footballs or anything like that? Or are they likely stones that people picked up from the site? Uncut stones, okay? So you will have, at the end of a stoning of an object or a person, you will have a pile of uncut stones. What does that sound like, those of you who have been traveling with us through the Bible? It sounds like an altar. And, some of those guys that just said that were in men's prayer breakfast, and I talked about this a little bit, yes. So don't give them too much credit, especially Gary. Okay, so you shall build an altar. You shall build an altar to the Lord your God, an altar of stones. You shall wield no iron tool on them. You shall build an altar to the Lord your God of uncut stones. So, you take an abominable act of a person, an act that couldn't be more foreign to God. You would need the longest rope with the biggest lasso imaginable, hoop imaginable to lasso this thing and pull it to God. And a public stoning does exactly that. It takes an exceptionally rogue act from God, and it turns it into a worship site. A pile of uncut stones is how an altar is made in the Old Testament. And so this rogue act is instantly turned into worship. And this is throughout the Bible. You remember when the elders of Korah stand up against God, and in order to see who's right and who's wrong, they take their bronze censers out, and they set them there. Well, Korah and his rebellion get destroyed, but their bronze censers are left. And God says, take the bronze censers, smelt it down, and beat it against my altar. So the bronze will be surrounded with the altar. So every time a rogue act happens, it's brought into worship. That's how it works. If you read the book of Joshua, what you find is that when God's bringing his people into the promised land, the entire promised land will be a worship site. And as a result of that, you find stones constantly talked about in the book of Joshua. Why? Because he's written up the dimensions of his promised land, and now he needs an altar in the middle of his promised land. So stones are everywhere in the book of Joshua, in forms of judgment, because he constantly turns bad acts into worship with righteous judgment. Righteous judgment. So those of you who are parents, or those of you who are children, that's all of you, you know when your parents disciplined you, or when you discipline your children, sometimes, like maybe 1 in 10 times, I get discipline right. Maybe that's generous. Maybe it's 1 in 20 times. That Ben Lovelady, in his screwed up mind and screwed up heart, get disciplined just right. Those of you who are parents have felt that before. You often tell it to your friends. Man, God was so gracious. Listen to how this went down. When discipline is done right, there is an aura of worship. There's an aura of peace. The child knows it, and you know it as a parent. This went well. Justice was equitably carried out. And that's what happens at the worship site of a stoning. But it's not just that. It's not just that. What is the altar? The altar is a place where people found what? Forgiveness. Forgiveness. So the altar is a place where rogue acts are made right before God and turned into worship when they're judged rightly. But the altar is also the place of forgiveness. That's why when you read through your Bibles, you find a guy named Joab is in big trouble, and he's about to be killed, and he runs and he puts his hands on the horns of the altar because he wants forgiveness. He wants this to be meted out between him and God and man. So he's hoping for forgiveness, because to see an altar is to see reconciliation, the place where reconciliation between God and man take place. So here's the deal. When a person needs to be capitally punished, okay, and that is carried out equitably, they did it, and they need to die now, okay? That's often the place where reconciliation with God and man takes place. And because we firmly believe that this life is not the end, that life goes into eternity, that death is just a threshold through which you walk into eternity. So you look at Achan in the book of Joshua, who is stoned to death for a grievous sin against the sacred elements that he stole. Okay, Joshua said to him, "Give glory to God and make this right." And Achan does that. He comes to grips with what he did. He makes it right before the Lord, and then he's killed. Is Achan in heaven? Absolutely. He made it right before him and the Lord. Are people on death row after the chair or after lethal injection or the firing squad? Do they go to heaven? Listen, if there's one thing that can get a person right before God, before they meet him, it's an imminent death, right? And so this is not just about righteousness throughout the land and making everything into a worship site. It is that, but it's also about the prisoner. What you'll find is one of the most abominable things our nation has ever done is come up with the concept of prison. And we didn't come up with it. It was here before us, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So we'll get there, okay? All right. So I just don't want you to think I'm hard on criminals. If anything, we've been more hard on criminals than we should. We'll talk about that to come. So stoning and worship go together. Stoning and worship go together. Stoning and forgiveness go together, because the stoning takes place at the place where someone was to be forgiven. So when God delivers judgment, I want you to catch this, want you to catch this. This is really important, not just in terms of the Old Testament, but in terms of Christ. Judgment of God always looks to the place where it can be atoned. Judgment of God always looks to the place where sin can be atoned for. It always does. So, when someone is stoned to death, an altar is left. That's what it said with Achan. There was a pile of stones, and then after he was dead, and that's what is in this passage as well, when someone's burned, all throughout the Bible, they're killed first and then burned, is the way it's supposed to happen. But what you're left with is an altar. Stone and fire and sword. It's all altar imagery is the idea. Okay, so that's the first thing. Stoning equals worship in the Bible. But then also you need to understand, and this concept is maybe as foreign to us as public stoning is foreign to us, and that is that there is an intimate connection between us and the land, us and the earth. Okay? That's foreign to us. We in some ways, the people who care a lot about the earth and the green movement, which I think Christians should have been at the start of to take care of our planet, it's what we're responsible for, that we don't get this right frequently. We see a huge disconnect between us and the land. But let me ask you something. If all of you died here instantly, and you stayed here for thousands of years, and someone walked in this church, what would they see in all these pews? Even beyond bones. Thousands and thousands of years. You'd see dust. You'd see dirt. You'd see earth. Okay? We're made from the earth. Are we not? Okay, and as a result of that, there is an intimate connection between us and the earth. We were meant to rule the earth. We're made of it, but we're meant to rule it. Okay? And the earth corresponds to us. Okay? When man sins in Genesis, what happens to the earth? It's put under a curse. Did the earth do something bad? No. The earth did exactly what God told it to. The earth marched according to God's design all through the creation narrative. The earth is under a curse because we mishandled the earth. Okay? So the earth is kind of like a child to us in a sense. It responds to us for good or for bad. This is why, who tells on Cain for killing Abel? The earth. What does God say? The blood of your brother is crying out to me from the ground. So there's this intimate connection between us and the earth. So what does God do to Cain? The ground is corrupted with Abel's blood, so what happens to Cain? You need to go be a wanderer. You can't live on this land anymore because you've corrupted the land. Okay? So there's this vital connection between us and the earth. Man's sins multiply on the earth. What happens? The earth swallows him up in the form of a flood. Korah stands up against God. What happens? The earth becomes an earthquake and swallows him. Right? There's this intimate connection. In the law, if someone was murdered and their body is found in the middle of a field and the murderer isn't found, the law instructs Israel how to handle it. They're to find that body and they're to measure out which tribe that victim, that murder victim, is closest to. Okay? In boundaries. And then that tribe has to go out to the site where there's water near it, and they are to sacrifice an animal, and then they're to wash their hands in the water after they sacrifice the animal to say his blood is no longer on our hands. Did you notice throughout this passage, over and over and over, it says the blood is on their head, the blood is on their head, the blood is on their head? That's the idea. When Paul ministers to the church at Ephesus, he leaves them and he says, I have not shrunk back from declaring to you the whole counsel of God. My hands are cleared from your blood. Okay? So blood goes somewhere. Guilt goes somewhere. And if guilt goes to the land and it's not dealt with properly, that land will languish. This is exactly what the Bible says. I'm not making this up. Hosea says, therefore the land mourns. This is for a people who have left God, who have denied God, who are running away from God. Therefore the land mourns, and all who dwell in it languish, and also the beasts of the field, and the birds of the heavens, and even the fish of the sea are taken away. In other words, where sin is rampant in a land, the actual land is affected, okay? This should not shock those of you who live in Illinois, right? We're in a race with California, New York, and Michigan to be the most liberal states in the nation. We're in a race. I don't know if these governors get together and say, who can get more worse? Listen, if you're a young person in our nation that's struggling with transgender or homosexuality, and you go to a counselor in Illinois to get away from that and say, I think this is polluting me. I'm starting to take stuff that's messing with my body. I'm starting to contemplate surgeries that aren't healthy. I'm starting to think along these lines. I don't think think I'm a woman in a man's body or a man in a woman's body. I'm starting to think, counselor, would you help me? And the counselor says, not even a Christian, says, let me try to help you out of this. That's where you want to go. I just want to listen to you and get you out of this mindset. What will happen to a counselor in Illinois? They will lose their license. Their profession will be bunk, over, done with. Go work at a gas station. Go find something else. You can no longer be a counselor. You can't escort someone even where they want to go if it's against the agenda of our state. So, and what's happening? Well, it's something called the Illinois Exodus, right? 35 to 40,000 people a year are leaving the state. They don't want to be here. They're leaving California. They're leaving Colorado. They're leaving New York. This is what happens. What's going to happen to those states when everybody leaves? They will languish. They will not do well, you know? We should not be foreign to these thoughts, okay? I step back and I look at our nation and I see the disasters, the fires that happen on the West Coast, the floods that happen on the East Coast, the immigration that's coming, the illegal immigration that's coming from Mexico, problems with Canada. Guys, I step back as I read the Bible and I look at, on all four sides, we're struggling, okay? I look at that as judgment from the Lord. It's frequently judgment in the Scriptures when these things start happening. Floods, fires, illegal immigration, these sorts of things. We've already been over that. I can't chase down all these rabbit trails, but we are a nation that is languishing, some states faster than others. And it's where the sin is rising to higher and higher levels, like as though in a race. Okay? So these are two connections you have to have when you come to the concept of public stoning. That stoning is intimately connected to worship, and that man is intimately connected with the land. And if you don't execute justice, the land becomes more and more and more corrupt and a bad place to live. Okay? These are intimate connections in the Bible that you have to get when you come to this passage if you're going to try to understand it rightly. Now, when you come to these sins and why these sins, what I first want to say is that every nation has sins that they would call anathema. What's anathema? Like worthy of hell, even if the nation doesn't believe in hell, okay? Like they are the abominable sins. Every nation has these. Christian nation, secular nation, they have these things. For instance, if you follow what's happening in Europe, you'll find that what's defined as hate speech, gets greater punishment than that of rape. Just look it up and find the stories. It's over and over and over and over. 2 years for hate speech in prison. If you post something on your social media that's negative towards any sort of thing that the nation's very pro towards, a lot of times it has to do with immigration, you'll get 2 years in prison for what's defined as hate speech. Rape, you get released almost immediately. Very short amount of time, and you're released back onto the streets. Okay, so every nation has what they determine as abominable sins, okay? When you look at the U.S., what are the sins from which you cannot recover? You know, we see baseball players, famous people, if they stand out against something, they lose their job, this sort of thing. And that can happen on both sides of the aisle. So I don't want to pick on just one side. But what are these sins? In the nation of the U.S., Roy Gain, I think, and he said this a long time ago, pointed it out. What's anathema in the U.S.? Shame. In modern Western culture, it has become politically incorrect to attach shame to behaviors that were previously viewed as immoral. Anything that threatens self-esteem is anathema, except stigmatization of political incorrectness, which is shameful beyond all measure. The result is a society that is increasingly amoral. What else would we expect? But he goes on. If shame lowers people's self-esteem, it is for a redemptive purpose. The prophets will rebuke Israel because they Jeremiah will actually say this. He said, you're a people that no longer know how to blush. Think about that. That there is nothing you do that you're ashamed of. Think about that. No shame whatsoever, no matter what is happening. That's what Israel gets condemned for. They don't know, their face doesn't know how to turn red anymore. If shame lowers a people's self-esteem, it is for a redemptive purpose, to wake them up to their true danger so that they can seek divine restoration and be saved. This is part of tough love that appears intolerant, but actually combats the destructive status quo of codependency that supports harmful behavior by putting up with it. I read a story one time of a traffic pileup that was happening in the midst of the fog. And police officers were trying to put down cones to warn people that if you keep driving on this road at this speed, you will likely die or get very injured, right? And no one's stopping with the traffic cones. They're just flying. So the officer starts throwing the traffic cones at the cars to say, you've got to stop. It's piling up. And this is what shame is meant to do. It's meant to keep a people from utter destruction. But to the degree that you're ashamed of shame, ashamed of saying something that might bring shame to someone, you are a contributor in the destruction. So this is the purpose. I want you to take a look at where God assigns capital punishment throughout the Scriptures. This is beyond this passage, but it's important to just read these and take in, is there a tie that binds all these seemingly disconnected reasons? Premeditated murder. Or I would say that, sacrificing your child to Molech, which is the god of the underworld, is a form of premeditated murder, as we see in this passage. Man-stealing. So, I'm going to talk about slavery in the application portion, and the Bible advocates for an indentured slavery, okay? And you're freaking out when you hear that. But you need to know that it's not what we hear in our history classes of what the U.S. did, and many other nations throughout the world did, which was man-stealing. Man-stealing was a capital crime. If you were found stealing a human being to put them into slavery, it was worthy of the death sentence, okay? So that's another capital punishment. Persistent disobedience of authorities and parents. You could read this passage and think, oh my goodness, my 6-year-old son who told me no, I'm going to go stoned to death. That's not what this was. As you read further into the law, you'll find that parents, and it's not even an instance of them doing this, it's an ostensible instance of someone doing this. It describes it as that parents would bring this person to them and says, my son won't work, he won't do this, he won't listen to me. And you get the idea, he's a glutton, a drunkard. In other words, he's a grown man who's not participating in society and is a complete loser that will not listen and is a dreg of society. It's an adult, it's not a child. It's a child of someone, but it's a grown child, is the idea. Adultery, homosexuality, the worst forms of incest, false prophecy, profanation of the Sabbath, blasphemy, idolatry, divination. So what ties these things together? Okay? That's what you want to look for. Is there a common theme to Israel's crimes worthy of capital punishment? And here's what I would say. Okay. The word for glory in the Old Testament is kavod. Okay? And that same word is the word for heavy. The word for heavy. So, man, I tried to pick up this piano. It's kavod. It's heavy. Okay? It's very heavy. Glory means heavy. Okay? So, what God does is when He assigns capital punishment, He assigns it to the most heavy things in society. The things that should have the most weight in a society. Okay? And when you look at this list, what you should find is that all of these things are deeply integrated with God Himself. Okay? What is murder? Who are you murdering? You're murdering a human being. Who is that image? Who is the image of that person made in? God. So you are murdering an image of God. When you steal a person's life, you're stealing the life of an image of God. You're stealing that. When someone's persistently disobedient to the parents and authorities, who do parents and authorities ultimately represent? God. That's why honor your father and mother comes right after all the commandments that have to do with God. That the closest God-human relationship is parents and children, okay? What's next to that? Adultery. Who are we meant to be the bride of as humanity? The bride of Christ, okay? So marriage is only given to us to symbol the love relationship that's meant to be had with us and God, okay? Homosexuality, the worst forms of incest, all have to do with sexual sins. These sins are so abominable because the joy that is had in a sexual relationship is given to us expressly to help us understand the degree of joy that's meant to be had between us and Christ. That's the deal. It is meant, sexual intimacy is meant to mirror the most intimate relationship that we were designed for, which is us and Christ. That's why there's no marriage in heaven. I hate to break it to you, according to Jesus. Because marriage is just an escort to help us understand our union with Jesus. Okay? That takes all of life to figure out. False prophecy. That's someone speaking instead of God. Profanation of the Sabbath. God wants our lives to be typified by rest in Him. Blasphemy is misusing God's name. Idolatry is worshiping another God. Divination has to do with false prophecy. It's speaking for God instead of letting God speak for Himself. Okay? So all of these things have to do with God Himself. The most safekeeping a nation can do is be drawn into God. The best nation, the most prosperous nation, will be those nations that are drawn entirely to God. That's just the way that the Bible generally speaks. That the more distant you get from God, the more you will just disappear into oblivion. The closer you get to God, the better you'll do as a nation. If you get to God for the right reasons. A lot of people want to come to God for the stuff He gives you. Well, that means you have another God than God. Right? The people who really come close to God, you'll find that their grip on their stuff becomes much freer, and they'll share with people, and there will be no poor in the society, and all this kind of thing. That's how it's meant to work, okay? Now, in this passage, what you find is the disruption of the family unit in Him, sexual sin, and divination rise to the top. Disruption in the family unit, giving your children to Molech. We don't do that today, but let me ask what you do give your children toward. Who is raising your children? Where are their hearts? Where are their bodies on a regular basis? These are all ways in our society that our tablets can raise our kids if we're not careful. Our TVs, our sports teams, our schools. There's so many ways in which a parent, the curriculum we use. All of these are to be informed thoughts that are centered in bringing our kids unto Jesus, that we are walking with our kids unto Jesus, that there is an entire family unit moving towards Christ, that our jobs aren't our God, and that we can take rest and times. We took our kids camping earlier this week, and I was telling someone, they said, how did it go? And I said, it was amazing. It was really hard to not be sad that I haven't been doing this our whole life. Like, that was the biggest hard part about the trip. Why haven't I done this earlier? You know, time sitting around the fire with our kids was just magical. It's just magical. It was intentional time away from distraction with our family in a good way. And I was ashamed for how little I've done that intentionally, you know? And so what are we, who is raising our kids? We get into sexual sin, and what is the common refrain in society? What's my sexual relationship have anything to do with you? It's private. Let me just shout this from the rooftops. Sex is not private. It often takes place in private places, but it is not a private thing. Don't be fooled by a nation that says sex is private. It's not, right? My sex life is none of your business. Okay, well then why does your sex life have everything to do with what I see on TV now? Every commercial. We had to stop watching the Thanksgiving parade. Why? Because your sexual preferences were all through the Macy's Thanksgiving parade. Sex starts private, but it overtakes a culture. It's what it does. It becomes the focal point. Sex is such an amazing gift. Why? Because it makes us most like God. What did God do? God made a human being. What can sex do? Make a human being. Therefore, you should expect, listen, if I want to get a conceal and carry, do I just go sign a paper? No. What do I have to do? I have to take a class. I have to pay money. I have to take a class. Why do I have to take a class? Because a gun is an exceptionally huge, weighty thing, right? It can take a life. So we assign great weight to it, and we should, right? So we should expect something that can make a life to have regulation or take this very seriously. This is how this works. This is how this works. Building permits. Why? Well, you know, you go to these other nations, an earthquake happens, and thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people die. Why? Because their buildings were made shabbily, not well. So we have these certain things in place where there are weighty things. Sex is no different. God has assignments for how it's used and how it's to be used properly. If you get it wrong, lots of people get screwed up. Okay? So sex is something that is like God, so it's a big deal. And then divination, where you call up people from the dead. This is what Saul did with Samuel because God stopped talking to him, right? So he needed to hear from a divine voice, so he communicates with the dead. And these things are around today, not as much as our nation as in other nations. But what it is you're listening to a false voice. So God assigns the death penalty towards those things that are most close to him. Does that make sense? And those things that are most close to him have the propensity to destroy a nation or build up a nation. Okay? That's the idea. Now, I want to talk about the death penalty and our nation. And in order to do that, I want you to think about this one thought. And this thought is not original with me. It was from the book that I read by Adam Terrell, Public Stoning. This is his subtitle, Public Stoning, a Nation with No Prisons. Just think on that thought for a second. Israel had no prisons. None. In fact, as you read through the Bible, the only nations with prisons were pagan nations. Think about that for a second. no prisons, no welfare system, other than personal care for the poor in your immediate vicinity. Public stoning is a very big deal because it makes you liable for the people around you, and them liable for you. So that if I see Nick doing something, I'm to go to him and beg him to steer away from that so that he doesn't go in the realm of capital punishment. Slavery. Israel's slavery was if someone was down and out, you took them in for a period of 7 years and you put them to work. And then at the end of that 7 years, you sent them away liberally. All right? Even if it was a thief, that's what you would do with a thief. Think, what good does it do to me if someone steals my car and they go to prison for X amount of time? Do I get a car? No. They just suffer. Oh, and who pays for that? You do. Oh, wait. So the guy who had his car stolen, okay, now has to pay for the guy that stole his car. And what does it do to the guy in prison that can never right that wrong because he's in prison? It strips his dignity. What does it do to that guy's kids while he's in prison? See, prisons are awful to society and to criminals. They're bad on both fronts, okay? So Israel was a nation with no prisons. They were a nation with no state-funded, nation-funded welfare system. No, people learned how to work. Otherwise, there was beating for them, right? And you're like, oh my goodness, this is so crazy. We can't believe this stuff. Okay, for those who have been in the military, you're kind of familiar with corporal punishment. Maybe not as recent days as in past, but some people needed reformed, okay? And there was strict regulations that if you went too far in corporally punishing your servant, then it was to be done to you as well. So there were parameters put here, but what you ended up with was a society who didn't need welfare and didn't need prisons. And it made everybody in the society very, very purposeful and responsible for how things went. That's how it was meant to go. But where we have it now is everybody's just shipped off. We drive by it on our highways. We see big fences, and we say to our kids, be careful. Be careful, you know? This is what life goes, and people get checks in the mail from the government, no idea what they're doing with that money. They have to try to put all these stipulations. Well, listen, if the society were more responsible, but nobody wants that. This is what I say. I'm not embarrassed of the Bible. I don't have the chutzpah to fulfill the Bible. Because I'd be nervous about taking a thief in my immediate proximity for 7 years. Wouldn't you? Right? But you're responsible to do it. And this is the way God does it. Just listen. We all leave here with a clipboard, and we start walking around Silvis, and we go door to door. Hey, we're from First Baptist Church. We're just advocating for Silvis to bring back the death penalty by public stoning. Would you be willing to sign this clipboard? Okay. All right. Now, if you had a second before the door was slammed in your face, okay, you could maybe say, no, I know. You're going to slam the door in my face. I've had it done all day today. But I just have one question. Can you take a guess at the number since 2011 when the death penalty was abolished in Illinois? Can you just take a guess at the number and how many people have been slaughtered by homicide in our state since 2011? Just a guess. I'm just curious if you're comfortable with that. 12,807 homicides. 573 homicides in Chicago in 2024 alone. What numbers would there be of homicides if there were a strict death penalty policy? You knew if you got caught, you were dead, and dead quickly. 1 year in prison is at the cost of Jaron's salary for 1 year for one inmate. You know, an average income, let's say, that's what pays for 1 year of an inmate in prison. It takes, on average, an entire year for one felony to get a decision made on it. Almost an entire year in prison it takes for the courts to make a judge on a felony. Food, housing, everything, lawyers, everything goes with that. A death penalty case can cost up to $1,300,000. So it's costly, all these things, right? So what are we comfortable? Here's the question. Before you don't sign my petition, how many deaths are you comfortable with before you start talking about capital punishment and how it can curb it? Well, it's the guns. It's the guns. It's the guns. Yeah, well, what about knives? We can come up with lots of ways to kill people. It's one of the best things we do. When does it end with taking a weighty situation and applying a weighty judgment? See, we're a nation that not just winces at death penalties. There's 27 states in our nation that still uphold the death penalty. 4 of those states have put a temporary ban on it. You can't do it. So we value murder more than we value life. There's just not another way to say it. We give more value to murderers than we do to the victims. And this is what's crazy. We all say that this person is worthy of not being in our presence for the rest of their life. Right? I mean, how many states have, they're bound to come, but how many states have said someone who murders someone shouldn't get a life sentence? That's a very small number, probably, at this point anyway. We'll see how it goes. But that's a small, so we've already determined that this person should not live in our presence. So they should die outside of our presence, but we just give them the whole life to do it, right? And we pay for it, and they pay for it in a way that doesn't really honor their crime, because their crime was taking a life. So a just penalty is having a life being taken. That's just. And so you never ask a murderer how bad murder is. You ask the murder victim's family how bad a murderer is. And so those are the people that should determine these things. And so this is something that all of us need to consider. We're very comfortable delegating the poor and thieves and criminals to our justice system because we don't really want to deal with it. We want them to deal with it. And that's not a good thing. That's not a sign of a righteous nation. Prison is not a sign of a righteous nation. It's a nation like parents who don't know how to properly discipline their kids. That's what that nation is. So these are worthy thoughts. I told you this sermon might get me fired. I told you this might happen. I said it a couple weeks ago. But this is the fact. But I want to close with considering Jesus. What was an altar? What was an altar? An altar was a four-cornered object in the Old Testament upon which blood was to be daubed on each of its corners. The text is very specific that this is what the altar was to be like. 4 corners. There was a bronze instrument that went on top of the pile of stones. 4 corners, blood on each of the corners. So Christ died on a 4-cornered object with blood on each of its 4 corners, from his head, his hands, and his feet. Where does Jesus go after he's crucified on a cross? Well, he goes beneath stone in a cave with a stone rolled in front of it. The place of judgment is the place for forgiveness. The place of judgment is the place for forgiveness. So the cross is the place for judgment and simultaneously the place for forgiveness and the love of God to transcend and bury the sin. It's buried beneath stone, just like people were stoned to death and buried beneath a pile of stones. And let me add on there, how many people were stoned to death? Well, we read only, as far as I know, 2 in the Old Testament. 3 in the Old Testament. And the point is, consistently throughout, when God addresses public stoning, it's so that people will fear and not commit the same crime. That's the idea. See, we're a nation. Remember when that guy got caned in one of the South Pacific nations? He got caned for graffitiing something, right? He got 8 hits with a rod. The U.S. went insane. You could not believe how many people talked about this kid getting caned, okay? But instead, we would rather people graffiti all our stuff and not do anything about it. That's what we'd prefer, because that's what happens in our nation. And so the point is when people execute things quickly, you don't have to do it much because people are afraid. But for Jesus, Jesus became the executed for the criminal. He's between 2 criminals. He's between, Barabbas was a murderer. Jesus is between criminals, and a murderer gets off so that he goes to the cross and gets buried beneath stone. He is where atonement takes place. He's the starting place of a nation being reconciled to him. You see, we can speak about true justice in a way that has felt true justice because Jesus experienced true justice in our place. So we don't take justice lightly. We're saved because of justice. So we take justice very thoughtfully as we go about it. And so as a nation moves away from taking weighty things in a weighty way, that nation will continually become a lighter and lighter and lighter nation in not a good way. Think about a person who consistently lies. Who takes them seriously anymore? Think about a person who continually takes from you, maybe it's an addiction or whatever. They take and take and take. What happens to that person? They become an isolated feature that even their own family can't take them in, unfortunately, because they're used and used and used. So to the degree that someone sins, they become isolated until the point of death. And that's exactly what happened with Israel. And they became scattered among the nations. But Jesus draws them in, takes the judgment for them so that we can have reconciliation with God and then become a people who start blessing and blessing a nation. And sometimes that starts with speaking rightly about justice and how equitable justice is to take place in a nation. And I close with this. Proverbs 14:34. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. And Jesus did both. Jesus gave us his righteousness, and he took our reproach. And that sets us free to be like Jesus in the world. May it be so. Musicians, would you please come? Thanks, Bruce. Yes.